The colony sky was always gray. Clouds never moved, and the air always felt heavy. In the broken houses on the edge of the settlement, 3 children lived under the rule of a stepfather. He was not their blood, but he controlled everything they had. And what they had was almost nothing. Food was rare in the colony. The soil was dead, and the machines that once grew crops had rusted long ago. Ships from other worlds came less and less, until finally no ships came at all. The little market in the center of the colony was filled only with scraps, bitter roots, and spoiled grain. But even those scraps cost credits the children did not have. The stepfather always found a way to feed himself. He took whatever he could trade, sometimes lying, sometimes stealing. And when he had food, he ate it all in front of them. The children watched, hungry eyes wide, their thin hands clutching their empty bowls. He laughed at their weakness, telling them that the strong survive. The weak, he said, were only burdens. The oldest child, a girl named Sira, tried to care for her younger brother and sister. She shared tiny pieces of dry bread she found. Sometimes she saved water in a cracked cup, hiding it from the stepfather. But it was never enough. Her brother, Kale, grew thinner each day, his bones sharp against his skin. And little Lyra, the youngest, often cried until no sound came from her throat. At night, the house echoed with silence. The stepfather snored in his room with a full belly, while the children curled together in a corner, shivering. Their stomachs ached, and their eyes stayed open in the dark. They dreamed of food, of warm soup, of sweet fruits they had never even tasted. One evening, the hunger became too much. Kale stumbled when he tried to stand. His legs gave way, and he collapsed on the cold floor. Sira rushed to him, shaking his shoulders, whispering his name again and again. Lyra began to cry, her tiny hands pulling at Sira's sleeve. But Kale did not answer. He only breathed in shallow gasps, weak and fading. Sira's heart pounded with fear. She knew if nothing changed, Kale would die. Her stepfather would not care. He would only say it was one less mouth to feed. Sira could not let that happen. She held her brother close, rocking him, whispering that she would find a way. But inside, she felt the crushing weight of hopelessness. That night, after the stepfather had locked his door, Sira and Lyra dragged Kale outside into the settlement streets. The night air was colder than the house, but there was no safety inside anymore. They walked slowly, Sira holding Kale up, while Lyra followed, clutching a broken toy. The streets were empty, filled with shadows and the sound of the wind. Abandoned machines lay like skeletons, their lights long dead. Rust and dust covered everything. The colony was alive, but it felt like a graveyard. Sira led them to the old storage units near the edge of the settlement. Once, these units had been full of supplies from ships. Now, they were only empty shells. She hoped maybe, just maybe, some forgotten can or box was still hidden in the corners. But when she pushed open the door, all she found was dust. Her throat burned, and tears filled her eyes. Lyra sat on the floor, holding Kale's hand, whispering his name. Sira pressed her forehead against the wall, trying not to cry. The children thought they were alone, but someone had been watching. A shadow moved quietly at the edge of the unit. Heavy boots stepped forward, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Sira froze, pulling Lyra close and covering Kale with her arms. Her heart raced, afraid it was the stepfather. But the voice that spoke was different. "Are you hungry?" the stranger asked. The voice was calm, deep, and strangely gentle. In the doorway stood a human, tall, broad-shouldered, with scars across his arms. His clothes were old, patched in many places, and in his hands, he carried a small pack. Sira stared, unable to answer. The human crouched down slowly, opening the pack. Inside was bread, thick and golden, and a flask of clear water that caught the light. The smell of bread filled the room, warm and real. Sira's stomach twisted in pain, and Lyra gasped, eyes wide. Kale stirred, whispering weakly, his lips dry. The human tore the bread into pieces. He held them out without speaking further. Sira hesitated, her hands trembling. Was this real? Or some trick? But when she saw Kale's pale face, she reached out. She took the bread and placed it in Kale's mouth. Her brother chewed slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. It was the first real food he had tasted in weeks. Sira looked at the human, and for the first time in her short life, she saw kindness in the eyes of an adult. Not cruelty, Not greed, not hunger for power, but something else. Something she could not yet name. Outside, the wind howled across the broken colony. But inside the storage unit, for the first time, there was warmth. The human said nothing more. He only sat near the doorway, watching the children eat. And in that silence, a strange new hope began to grow. The next morning in the broken storage unit, the children woke to the smell of bread still on their hands. They had eaten until their stomachs no longer hurt, and now they slept with a peace they had almost forgotten. The human sat nearby, his back against the wall, silent and watchful. When Sira's eyes opened, she thought for a moment it had been only a dream. But the man was still there, his scarred hands resting on his knees, his eyes calm. He looked at her and spoke in a low voice. "You took care of them even when you had nothing," he said. "That is strength." Sira blinked, unsure of how to answer. No adult had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with respect, not with recognition. She only nodded, tightening her arm around Kale, who was still weak but alive. The human reached into his pack again and offered the flask of water. Sira took it carefully, letting Kale drink first, then Lyra, and finally herself. The water was fresh, unlike the bitter, metallic liquid they usually found. Each sip felt like life itself. Sira whispered, "Why are you helping us?" Her voice was almost a plea, as if she expected him to take everything back. The human paused before answering. "Because no one else will," he said simply. His tone carried no pride, no demand for thanks, only truth. He stood, his shadow filling the doorway, and motioned for them to follow. "I can give you more than scraps and dust," he said. "But you must decide if you trust me." Sira looked at her brother and sister. Their faces thin, their bodies weak. If they stayed here, they would die. She swallowed her fear and nodded. Slowly, the children rose, Kale leaning on her, Lyra clutching her hand. And together they followed the human into the ruined streets. The colony looked even darker in daylight. The buildings were cracked and leaning. The ground was broken with rusted metal and shattered glass. People watched from doorways, their eyes hollow, their faces unfriendly. They whispered when they saw the human walking with alien children. Some spat on the ground, others laughed. But the man ignored them, his steps steady. The children stayed close, feeling the heat of anger from the others, yet somehow safe behind him. He led them past the market, where traders shouted over scraps of moldy food. Sira's stomach twisted at the sight, but the human did not stop. Finally, they reached the edge of the colony, where old fences marked the boundary. Beyond lay the wasteland, dry ground, twisted metal, and silence. The stepfather had always said nothing survived out there, but the human kept walking, confident. At last, they came to a small shelter built into the side of a collapsed structure. It looked simple, almost hidden, but when the door opened, warmth spilled out. Inside were blankets, a small fire pit with steady heat, and shelves with supplies. There was food stored carefully in boxes, water in clean containers, and tools neatly placed. The children froze, unable to believe what they saw. This place felt alive, safe, and real. Lyra gasped softly and ran to touch the blankets, her small fingers sinking into the fabric. Kale stared at the food with wide eyes, too shocked to speak. Sira's heart pounded. She had never imagined such a place could exist here. The human crouched down, his voice firm but kind. "You can stay here if you wish," he said. "But you must understand, this is not charity." Sira frowned, unsure of his meaning. He continued, "Family means looking after each other, not taking and leaving nothing." He placed his scarred hand on the ground, steady and open. "I will protect you, but you must also protect each other and me." For a long moment, there was silence. The children looked at one another, fear and hope mixing in their eyes. Sira thought of her stepfather, of the cruelty, the hunger, the endless nights of despair. Then she looked at the human, a stranger, yes, but one who had already done more for them than anyone else ever had. She felt a weight lift from her heart. Slowly, she nodded. "We will," she whispered, her voice shaking. Lyra copied her, and even Kale, weak as he was, whispered agreement. The human gave a small smile, rare and faint. "Then you are not alone anymore," he said. He rose and placed bread on the table, breaking it into even pieces. And for the first time, the children ate in warmth, not fear. Outside, the colony still rotted, still whispered with cruelty. But inside this shelter, something new had begun. Not blood, not obligation, but the first fragile spark of a chosen family. Back in the settlement, the stepfather woke to silence. His house felt empty. The corner where the children usually huddled was bare. He shouted their names once, twice, his voice sharp with anger. When no answer came, his eyes narrowed. He searched the room, his gaze falling on a half-empty cupboard. The little scraps of food he had hidden there were gone. Rage filled his face, his fists slamming against the wall. "They stole from me," he snarled, his voice echoing in the broken house. To think weak little mouths would dare. His rage was not from loss of family, but from loss of control. He had ruled them through hunger, through fear, and now they had slipped from his grasp. That betrayal was something he could not allow. He stormed into the streets, his heavy boots striking the dust. Neighbors leaned from doorways, watching as he marched. They had heard his shouts, seen his red face twisted with fury. Most turned away, unwilling to get involved. But some whispered, shaking their heads. Everyone knew the stepfather was cruel, but cruelty had become normal in this broken colony. No one cared enough to stop him. He searched the market first, throwing aside crates, demanding if anyone had seen them. The traders avoided his eyes, pretending they had no answers. But one old man pointed toward the edge of the settlement. "Children don't last long out there," he muttered. The stepfather growled and spat, then continued his march. His hands itched for punishment. Not because the children mattered, but because they had defied him, and defiance had to be crushed. Meanwhile, in the hidden shelter beyond the fences, the children sat by the fire. For the first time in months, warmth filled their bodies. Kale leaned against a blanket, his face less pale than before. Lyra played with a small wooden carving the human had given her. Syrah sat close to the fire, watching the man with cautious eyes. She still did not know his name. He had not offered it, and she had not asked. But already, she trusted him more than the one who had claimed to be their guardian. The human sensed her gaze and finally spoke. "You fear him," he said, his voice steady. Syrah flinched, but then nodded. "He is not kind," she whispered. "He will come for us." The human's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he already expected this. "He will come," he agreed. "But you will not face him alone." Later that evening, as the fire dimmed, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside. The children stiffened, eyes wide with fear. The human stood, slow and calm, moving to the doorway. Through the cracks, Syrah saw the familiar figure approaching. The stepfather, broad and angry, a jagged blade in his hand. His voice rang out, sharp as broken glass. "You think you can hide from me? You think you can steal from me?" Lyra whimpered, clutching Syrah's arm. Kale tried to sit up, but his body trembled. Syrah pressed her siblings close, her heart hammering in her chest. The human stepped outside, facing the stepfather in the dying light. For a long moment, they stared at one another. One was a man who had lived on cruelty. The other, a man who had chosen to protect. "You have something of mine," the stepfather sneered. "They are not yours," the human replied, his voice low. "They are children, not property." The stepfather laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. "They are mouths to feed, nothing more," he said. "Without me, they are nothing." The human's expression did not change, but his voice cut through the air like steel. "Without you, they have a chance to live." The stepfather's face twisted with rage. He lifted his blade, pointing it at the human. "Step aside, or I will cut you down," he threatened. The children cried out, fear filling their voices. But the human did not move. He planted his feet firmly on the ground. His hands empty, his eyes steady. He spoke only one sentence. "Family is not given, it is chosen." The stepfather snarled and lunged forward. And in that moment, the fragile peace of the children's new life shattered. The clash of past and future had begun, and the night air filled with the promise of violence. The stepfather lunged forward, his blade flashing in the firelight. The children screamed from inside the shelter, their voices breaking the night. But the human did not retreat. He moved with steady precision, catching the attacker's wrist before the blade could strike. For a moment, the two men struggled, strength against strength, anger against calm. The stepfather snarled, his teeth bared like an animal. "You think you can take what is mine?" he spat. The human's grip tightened, his voice low. "They were never yours." With a sudden twist, He forced the blade downward, its edge scraping harmlessly across the ground. The stepfather stumbled back, furious, his eyes glowing with hate. Inside the shelter, Syrah clutched Kale and Lyra close. Her heart pounded as she watched through the doorway. Every part of her wanted to rush out, but her body refused to move. She could only watch as two worlds clashed in front of her eyes. The stepfather raised the blade again, this time swinging wildly. The human stepped aside, the cut missing by inches. His movements were not fast but controlled, as if every step was measured. The stepfather roared and attacked again. This time, the human caught his arm and drove a fist into his chest. The sound of air rushing out of lungs filled the night. The stepfather staggered, but his rage gave him new strength. "You are nothing," he gasped. A broken soldier, hiding in scraps. The human's eyes darkened, the scars on his arms catching the dim light. "Maybe I am broken," he answered. "But even broken things can protect." The stepfather charged, the blade high above his head. The children screamed again, but the human did not flinch. Instead, he stepped forward into the attack. His hand caught the wrist, his shoulder slammed into the man's chest. The blade slipped from the stepfather's grip and clattered to the ground. The fight turned into fists and fury. The stepfather clawed and struck with wild rage. The human met every blow with steady force, his face cold, his body unshaken. Finally, the human caught the man's throat, forcing him down into the dirt. The stepfather choked, his hands scraping at the grip around his neck. His eyes bulged with fury and fear. The human leaned close, his voice quiet but filled with steel. "This instant." For a moment, the human could have ended him. One squeeze, one push, and the cruelty would stop forever. But then he looked back at the children, three faces staring with wide, terrified eyes. He saw their fear, not just of the stepfather, but of him. Slowly, his grip loosened. The stepfather gasped for air, coughing and spitting. The human picked up the blade and held it steady. But instead of striking, he drove it into the ground beside the man's head, the steel buried deep in the dirt. The stepfather froze, realizing the choice being made. The human's voice cut through the silence. "I will not kill you," he said. "Not because you don't deserve it, but because they deserve to see another way." The stepfather's face twisted, confusion mixing with rage. "You are weak," he hissed. The human shook his head, his voice calm. "No, this is strength." He stood tall, leaving the man on the ground, beaten but alive. He turned toward the children and extended his hand. "Come inside," he said gently. Syrah hesitated only a moment before guiding her siblings forward. They stepped past the defeated figure, their small steps carrying the weight of a decision. They chose the human, not the one who had ruled them through fear. The stepfather glared after them, his pride shattered. He coughed, spitting blood, his body broken but his hatred burning stronger than ever. He watched as the human closed the shelter door behind them, shutting him out. And in that moment, the stepfather swore he would return. Not for love, not for family, but for revenge. Inside, the children sat trembling, unsure of what had just happened. The human placed the fire back to life, the crackling flames warming the room. He knelt before them, his scarred hands steady, his voice low. "You do not have to fear him anymore," he said. "But you must be ready, because cruelty always tries to come back." Syrah stared at him, her heart full of questions. But the only words she found were simple. "Why protect us? We are nothing to you." The human looked at her, his eyes heavy with memory. "Because once, someone protected me when I thought I was nothing," he answered. "And I learned, family is not about blood, it is about choice." The children leaned into him, tired, afraid, but also safe. The firelight danced on their faces. And though outside the night still echoed with hatred, inside the shelter, a new bond had been forged. One built not on fear, but on choice. And that choice was stronger than blood. The storm outside raged through the colony that night, dust and wind scraping against broken walls. But inside the human shelter, there was warmth, firelight flickering across the children's faces. For the first time in their lives, they fell asleep without fear of waking to cruelty. They huddled in blankets, their small bodies finally resting, while the human sat awake, silent and still. His scarred hands rested on his knees, his eyes fixed on the door, listening to every sound beyond. When morning came, The children woke to a smell they had almost forgotten. Real food cooking slowly over the fire. The human had prepared a stew, thick with roots and dried meat, its scent filling the small room. Syrah blinked in disbelief. Kale sat up weak but eager, and Lyra clapped her hands, laughing softly. They ate carefully at first, afraid it might vanish like a dream. But the food stayed, warm and real, and it filled the emptiness in their stomachs. After they had eaten, the human stood and handed Syrah a small bundle of tools. "You will learn," he said, his tone firm but patient. "This place is safe only if we keep it alive." He showed them how to gather water from the old pipes, how to repair cracks in the walls with scavenged metal, how to store food so it would last longer. Every task was simple, but to the children, it felt like learning magic. At night, when the work was done, he told them stories. Not stories of kings or warriors, but of Earth, his lost home. He spoke of vast oceans that stretched farther than sight, of forests so deep they breathed like living lungs, of skies filled with endless stars, unbroken by smoke. The children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations painting pictures brighter than the broken colony could ever show. Lyra asked if they could see it one day. The human only gave a faint smile. "Perhaps, if the stars are kind," he whispered. Still, the shadow of the stepfather lingered in their minds. Kale often woke at night, clutching the blanket, whispering that he could hear footsteps outside. Syrah sat by the door sometimes, staring into the darkness. Even Lyra, though she laughed in the day, sometimes cried softly when she thought no one heard. The human never scolded them for fear. Instead, he stayed close, his presence a silent shield. And each time they woke in panic, they saw him there, steady, watching, and they slept again. The days passed, and slowly the children grew stronger. Kale's cheeks filled with color, his legs able to carry him without trembling. Syrah's eyes grew sharper, her hands steady as she learned the tools. And Lyra laughed more often, her tiny steps chasing the warmth of firelight. The human watched them carefully, never praising too much, never promising too loudly. But in his eyes, something soft grew each day, something he had long thought broken. One evening, as the fire burned low, Syrah sat beside him. She looked at his scars, the lines across his arms, and the wear on his face. "Were you a soldier?" she asked quietly. The human was silent for a long time, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. "Yes," he said finally, his voice heavy. "But war only takes, it never gives." Syrah nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of his words. She whispered, "Then why give to us?" The human looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because I am tired of watching children starve," he answered. "And because no one should face the dark alone." The shelter became more than walls and fire. It became a place of belonging, a place where laughter returned in small, fragile pieces. The children began to call it home, though they had never truly known what that word meant before. And slowly, in whispers and shy glances, they began to call the human something more. Not stranger, not soldier, not protector, but father. Yet beyond the shelter walls, danger still waited. The stepfather's rage had not cooled. He gathered whispers in the market, spoke to others hungry for power. He told them of the human's supplies, of food and warmth hidden beyond the fences. Greed sparked in their eyes, for in a dying colony, survival was worth more than blood. They listened, they nodded, and plans were made. Inside the shelter, the children slept in peace, their dreams finally warm. But outside, the storm of cruelty and envy was building once again. And soon, their fragile new family would be tested by fire. The days of peace could not last. Though the children laughed again, though they worked and learned and dreamed, shadows moved in the colony. The stepfather's bruises had faded, but his hatred had not. He whispered to men in the market, to drifters with hungry eyes. He told them of food hidden in the wasteland, of supplies guarded by one human and 3 weak children. To men with empty stomachs and empty hands, such words were seeds of greed. And greed grew fast in broken soil. One night, as the fire burned low inside the shelter, the human stirred. His eyes opened without sound, his body tense. He had lived too long with danger to ignore the feeling that crept through the dark. Outside, the wind carried more than dust, it carried footsteps. Slow, heavy, too many to belong to one man. He rose silently, checking the door. The children slept, their breaths soft and steady, unaware of the storm about to break. Beyond the fence, figures gathered. The stepfather stood at their front, his face twisted with triumph. He pointed toward the hidden shelter, his voice low and venomous. Inside, food, water, warmth, more than any of you have seen in months, he hissed. And guarded by nothing but one broken soldier and useless brats. The men grinned, their hunger sharpening into cruelty. They gripped pipes, knives, broken tools turned into weapons. Together they stepped into the wasteland, their eyes glowing with greed. Inside, the human knelt beside Sira and shook her gently awake. Her eyes opened in confusion, then widened in fear as she saw his expression. "They are coming," he whispered. "Stay with your brother and sister. Do not leave this room." Sira's lips trembled. "Him?" she asked, though she already knew. The human nodded once, his jaw tight. Her stomach clenched with dread, but she pulled Kale and Lyra close, holding them in silence. The human stepped outside, the cold night wrapping around him. The firelight behind him cast his shadow long and tall against the dirt. Ahead, he saw them, a dozen shapes moving closer, the stepfather at their front. The stepfather raised his arm and laughed, a cruel sound that cut through the wind. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he spat. "Now you will lose everything, just as I lost control." The human's voice was calm, steady, like steel cooled by water. "You never had control," he said. "You only had fear, and fear is not power." The stepfather snarled, waving the others forward. "Take him, take the food, and drag the children back. They will learn obedience once more." The men rushed forward, their feet pounding the ground. But the human did not move back. He reached into the dirt beside the doorway and pulled free a metal staff. It was simple, heavy, scavenged long ago, but in his hands, it became a weapon of precision. The first attacker swung a blade. The human struck once, the blow sending the man sprawling into the dust. Another came from the side, but the staff spun, cracking against ribs, the sound sharp and final. The stepfather watched, fury boiling. He had expected the human to fall, to break. Instead, he moved like a soldier reborn, every strike clean, every step measured. The attackers hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. They had come for easy prey, but what they found was iron standing against them. Inside the shelter, Sira held her siblings close, listening to the clash outside. Every thud, every cry, made her heart race. Kale whispered, "Will he win?" Sira's voice shook but held firm. He must. And in her chest, for the first time, she believed it. The fight raged, dust rising in clouds, weapons clashing against steel and bone. One by one, the attackers fell back, groaning, broken, their courage crumbling. Only the stepfather remained, his eyes burning with hate. He lifted his jagged blade and pointed it at the human. "This ends tonight," he spat. The human raised his staff, his voice like thunder in the quiet wasteland. "Yes," he said, "it does." The two men circled, the world shrinking to their battle. One fought for pride, for cruelty, for control. The other fought for family, for choice, for hope. And in the firelit dark, the children's fate balanced on the edge of that clash. The night air was heavy, filled with dust and silence broken only by the sound of two men circling each other. The stepfather's blade gleamed, jagged and cruel, his hands shaking with rage. The human held the staff steady, his eyes calm, his body firm. One fought with fury, the other with purpose. And the children, hidden inside the shelter, listened with pounding hearts. The stepfather struck first, his blade cutting through the air with wild speed. The human sidestepped, the staff swinging in a sharp arc, knocking the weapon aside. The impact rang like thunder, sparks flying into the dark. The stepfather roared, slashing again and again, each strike fueled by hate. But hate had no rhythm, no balance. The human blocked, parried, struck with precision, his movements steady as stone. Inside, Sira whispered to Kale and Lyra, "Don't be afraid, he is fighting for us." Her words trembled, but she forced strength into them. For she knew this was not only his fight, it was theirs too. Outside, the stepfather stumbled back, his breath ragged. His face twisted with disbelief as blood ran from a cut on his arm. "You cannot win," he spat, His voice cracked with desperation. The human's voice cut through the night, quiet but unshakable. I already have. He drove the staff forward, striking the stepfather's chest. The man fell hard to the ground, his blade clattering into the dust. The attackers who had followed him groaned from where they lay scattered. None dared to rise again. The stepfather crawled, clutching his chest, his eyes wild with fury. He glared up at the human, hate burning brighter than his strength. You think they will love you? He hissed. They are nothing, nothing but mouths to feed. The human lowered the staff, his shadow stretching long over the broken man. They are more than you ever were, he answered, his tone final. For a moment, the human stood still. The choice of blood lay before him again. End the cruelty with one strike, or leave him broken, defeated, but alive. The children's voices carried faintly from the shelter. Please, Lyra whispered, come back inside. And the human understood. Killing him would not erase the fear in their hearts. But showing mercy, even to a monster, would teach them that strength could mean something greater. He turned his back on the stepfather, his staff lowering to his side. Leave, he said, his voice cold as iron. Do not return, not for them, not for me, not for anything. The stepfather's scream echoed in the night, raw and broken. But when he staggered to his feet, he ran, stumbling into the dark, swallowed by the wasteland. The human stood for a long moment, breathing steady, his shoulders heavy with the weight of choice. Then he stepped back into the shelter, closing the door behind him. Inside, the children rushed to him, Syrah's eyes wet with tears, Kale's voice trembling, Lyra's arms clinging tight. You came back, Syrah whispered, her voice breaking. I promised I would, he said, kneeling to meet their gaze. You are safe now. The firelight warmed their faces, chasing the shadows that had haunted them for so long. For the first time, they were not afraid of tomorrow. Syrah pressed her forehead against his shoulder. Kale gripped his arm. Lyra buried her face against his chest. And in that moment, they knew the truth. This man was not their blood, not their kin by birth. But he had chosen them, fought for them, protected them. And in choosing them, he became what they had always longed for. Father, Syrah whispered, the word fragile but strong. The human closed his eyes, the word cutting through the scars on his soul. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around them. You are my family now, he said, his voice soft. And the fire crackled, sealing the promise in the air. Outside, the colony still rotted, still whispered with cruelty. But within that shelter, something stronger than hunger or fear had been born. A chosen family, forged not by blood, but by love and will. And in that fragile, unbroken bond, the children found hope. And the human, scarred and weary, finally found a reason to keep fighting.